Hello, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us at our Fall 2022 virtual program entitled, What Do We Do Differently? Perspectives on Digital Project Management in Libraries and Archives. This program was developed by the Digital Scholarship Section's Professional Development Committee in collaboration with both the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and the Outreach Committee. Thank you to our presenters, ACRL staff, and DSS committee members for their coordinated effort. In the spirit of encouraging equity, diversity, and inclusion in the DSS community and beyond, I will read a brief statement. Please take a moment and review the guidelines on this slide. We, the DSS community, agree to frame interactions in DSS activities with these guidelines in mind. We recognize that whenever we engage as a community, we will all make mistakes and that may unintentionally harm individuals or groups. But we agree to take responsibility for the results of our words and actions. We expect that all DSS meetings will begin with a brief review of these agreements, so that they may become standard for activities in the section. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Our presenters today include Rebecca Bacher. Rebecca is the Digital Collections Librarian at Florida International University. She oversees the entire digital project lifecycle to create digital collections. She has an MLIS from Florida State University. Kristen Clark is the manager of digital collections at Texas Women's University. Kristen manages the digitization, metadata creation, and ingest of special collections materials into access and preservation systems, including Content DM, DoraCloud, and Amazon Glacier. Kristen develops digitization and digital preservation workflows and serves as the liaison with TWU's Special Collections and University Archives Department. Samantha McNeely is the Archives and Special Collections Librarian at Auburn University at Montgomery. She started working in the Archives Department in 2005 as a staff member until in 2015 when she was hired as the Archives and Special Collections Librarian. She has a BA and an MLA in history from Auburn University at Montgomery, as well as an MLIS from the University of Alabama. Max Prudhomme is the Director of Digital Curation at the Oklahoma State University Library. He provides leadership and management in the areas of digital curation, preservation, and discovery of digital resources. Now we welcome our presenters.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start first just because I'm the first person to speak. And just kind of wanted to give a bit of an overview at the beginning. I'm Rebecca Bacher. I'm the Digital Collections Librarian at FIU. And in speaking with my co-presenters when we were talking about this, we came up with some kind of themes on things that it's how we came up with this presentation. All of our institutions, even though you're going to see in our individual presentations, are different. They have different sizes, different resources, and sometimes even different focus, but we share common missions. We're all trying to preserve information and provide access. A lot of our practices you're going to see overlap in our digitization, engagement, and training practices that we do. But we have different resources, and we're certainly coming from different budgets, different technology, and different staffing. And hopefully by kind of hearing our little slices of how we do things might give some insight that could be helpful to you. Next slide, please. So this was also kind of like a little snapshot we wanted to provide. These are the 4 institutions you can see on the left. And we were just kind of talking about, what are our resources? What are the staffing that we have? And how does that inform kind of what we can do? What sort of funding are we looking at in our individual departments? What tools do we use? And what sort of materials are we digitizing? What are the formats that we're working with? And then finally, as you can see in that last column, What are our points of access and our points of preservation? I'll just give like 1 second. You guys can just look at this. We'll certainly be going into more detail, but just to kind of orient you into who we are and kind of the different perspectives that we're going to be bringing. And next slide, please. So yes, I'm Rebecca Bacher, and this is Florida International University. This is the Green Library on our main campus, most important building on campus, as I say. FIU is a really big school. We're a large public research university. We have over 55,000 students. We're the largest minority serving institution in the United States. Our digital repository is called DPanther, and it is built on an open source content management system that was created by the University of Florida called SOAP-XCM. So we use a homegrown platform and we manage it locally. We also use Digital Commons as our institutional repository, and that's what houses our theses and dissertations and student faculty work. And I oversee the digitization of retrospective theses and dissertations, but I won't really be talking about that part as much. We also use Dataverse as our data repository, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'm mostly going to be talking about what we put into DPanther, our digital repository. So my department works with university and community partners to create their digital collections. My department doesn't have any physical items of their own. We're a service department. We're a service to others, both within FIU and in the local community. Our model is one where we train and support and collaborate with our partners for their digitization and metadata creation. So partners for us would be library partners, such as special collections, university archives, sound and image, government resources. University partners might include, the history department, religious studies, or it might include some of the FIU affiliated museums that we have, and there's 3 of those. But much of our work is done with what we call community partners, and these are local museums and archives and historical societies and independent libraries, even municipalities and national parks that have items and they want to provide digital access to them, and they want to have their items hosted in our repository. So I've done some screenshots. It's hard to kind of see, but the front end of DPanther, you can see a sampling of our partner collections. So we have like the digital archives of the city of Miami Beach. We have them for the city of Coral Gables. We have a number of historical societies and many library university departments. Especially our special collections, University Archives has a healthy bit of the collection in there. Our sound and image librarian's been digitizing LPs and houses the largest collection of Cuban music outside of Cuba. And overall, our repository gets about 6 to 7 million hits a year, with that music collection being one of the most popular items. Next slide, please. So this is a workflow I created for this. It's not exactly to scale, but what I was hoping it would do is illustrate how we in the Digital Collection Center kind of collaborate and are in constant communication with our partners, who are those actors that are listed there. Those would be people working in our partner institutions or departments. So we in the Digital Collection Center consult with and train and support their digitization efforts, and we communicate back and forth. We might be working with interns or students, staff, librarians, volunteers. It varies depending on the partner and the project. So for like a museum, they could be scanning their own photographs or negatives. A city might be sending their newspapers out to a vendor to be scanned, or it could be like a small historical society scanning their own items. But a lot of what we do, in addition to just kind of providing some assistance on how to digitize, is provide support to our partners to create their metadata for their digital objects. And this, we assume that our partners are experts on their items, but they may need some guidance on metadata standards, specifically for digital records. We spend a lot of time talking about copyrights. We talk a lot about making sure that the records are going to conform to what my repository needs. There's a lot of date formats and standardization that we want them to do up front, and that can take a lot of time. We introduce to some people, if this is like a new concept, ideas of controlled vocabularies or other metadata best practices. We assign our own unique identifiers to all records that are kind of displayed in the records along with our partners' identifiers. So that's all that green part. Then the yellow part is where we also kind of assist partners in some grant writing. We know we're They might be able to find resources for their digitization. We have a local consortium that has a digitization kit and provides some small seed grants, so we can kind of point people in that direction and help guide them. And we also provide guidance in the creation of oral histories. So from there, we're the gatekeepers to our digital repository, and that's where the processing comes. We process our digital records and work to make sure that they're appropriately structured and formatted and standardized. We do a lot of quality control. We try to geolocate items if we can, because we have like a map feature in dpanther. We OCR textual materials. We create captions on any audio, video, or oral histories. And basically, we just try to make the digital record as accessible as possible in that kind of processing stage. And from there, we ingest the digital records into our repository. So that's hosting them in dpanther, and in most instances, also then opening up the records to be harvested by DPLA via an OAI PMH. And then we also provide long-term digital storage if that's something that our partner has asked us to do. Next slide, please. So with every partner having different materials and timeframes and resources and abilities, our life cycle varies for every project. So for funded projects and grants, there's usually a prescribed timeframe that we have to adhere to, and that kind of governs the timing of everything. But all projects kind of require us to stop and take stock and do an assessment of the items held by the partner, make sure we understand what our partner's goals are, what resources they have available, and kind of come up with a game plan. A lot of the projects require a lot of upfront coaching, followed by a lot of regularly checking in, a lot of communication, and a lot of that is very front loaded to make sure that they're set up. A partner might need us to train volunteers to use a flatbed scanner, or we might have to go to a small group of volunteers who've never heard about metadata and do exercises on, let's all describe this photograph together, and how can we do this in a way that's going to be standardized. We put together a lot of training materials, specific usually to the project and specific to the skills of our partners if we can. So we make a lot of LibGuides, and we do PowerPoint presentations and one-on-one trainings. And that being said, many of our partners are very skilled already in digitization and metadata creation. They just kind of need us to do that final processing and hosting part. But even in those instances, there's still the processing requires me to rename files, restructure them so that they'll be able to be ingested into our repository. I have to create the XML records and still do a lot of quality control. I'm seeing Chris's comment. Some of our partners do external vendors to do the scanning and OCR work. And that's not always great because vendors don't. I had a project recently where, yes, it was all scanned and OCR, but it was newspapers and they did it all across. They didn't segment any of the columns. I'm like, oh goodness, so I had to redo it. You can see on that left side of my screen some of the training materials that we have. Like I said, LibGuides, we give them example spreadsheets, we provide videos on how to use equipment, and PowerPoint presentations on how to edit videos. And like I said, we do a lot of one-on-one trainings, usually by Zoom, or sometimes we might go visit them wherever they are. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, we've got a lot of challenges. One challenge that we have is that we have to kind of balance our need to control all of our records. We believe very strongly in empowering our partners, and we're sensitive to being the ones that come in and tell them how to do, we're the librarians and your records need to look this way. We want them to see us as a service, and we want to trust that they know the priority of things that need to be digitized, and that they know how to describe their things. They just need a little bit of guidance. So they choose their priority. We give them suggestions and kind of, maybe if they don't know, give them some guidance in the form of best practices, but ultimately it's up to them what their collection looks like. And they get to decide how they're going to describe their items, again, with some guidance and some best practices. So as a result, our digital repository is not as uniform as others might be. And we had to become okay with that. It's not, these aren't all perfect, created by librarian records, but they are now community records, and we have decided that it's worth it. Another challenge that we face, particularly being in Miami, is that a lot of our content is in different languages. And our repository doesn't necessarily like it. It doesn't like diacritics or accents in the file names. It doesn't like them in titles and other fields as well. Our OCR and captioning software in languages other than English is not always as accurate. And there aren't always as many resources for other languages. Some of our records have metadata in the language of like the document or the video. And for those of us in the Digital Collection Center who don't speak those languages, it's hard to do quality control on that. And it's also just the standardization and controlled vocabularies in other languages I'm just not as familiar with. Another challenge is that our partners may not have access to the equipment they need to digitize all their items. As I mentioned, our library consortium has like a digitization kit, but they only get it for a set amount of time. And if they haven't finished, they might still have to pass it along, which could be a challenge. And then another challenge is that, we're trying to fill the gaps for our partners. These are people coming with all different levels of abilities, but it's not always immediately apparent what their gaps are and what they might need from us. And so that's just something that we're always having to kind of evaluate. And that's where that collaboration and communication really becomes key. And then finally, our biggest challenge is, as this has been set up, our partners are cranking stuff out. They know how to digitize. They know how to create metadata. They give it to me on a nice clean spreadsheet, but the volume has now increased. So that means we've had to have more server space. I've had to try to automate my part as much as I can because the only part I can really control is what I do. But we're just getting more and more. And now with records going to DPLA, I have to do some tweaking to our XML files. And so I've had to try to learn to be as absolutely as efficient as I can and to try to do things in batches, just because of the volume which is a good thing, right? We want all these records. But it's meant that I've had to expand my skill set in order to be more efficient at this part. And I just say overall, though, this model has worked really well for us. I hope our partners know that they're really valued. I think their value can be shown in the use of our collection. And we feel that this has allowed us to preserve and make really wonderful, unique content available. And that's it for me. Thanks.
All right, I'm up next. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Clark, and I am the manager of digital collections at Texas Women's University. TWU is a public co-ed university in Denton, Texas, and it's the nation's largest university system focused on women. You can see pictured on the screen the Black Huey Library. And within the library is the Special Collections and University Archives Department. And these Special Collections is the state's official archive on the history of women. And TWU is the largest source of research materials on Southern and Southwestern women in the United States. We house collections on women's history, women's organizations, women's aviation, and we're the official archive for the Women's Air Force Service pilots. I'm a part of the Digital Strategies and Innovations Department. And as my intro said, I am a liaison with Special Collections and work closely with them to get their materials digitized and uploaded into access and preservation systems. I also do collaboration with faculty on class projects and digital humanities projects. All of our digitization at the moment occurs in-house, and it's managed by my department. And we're also digitizing legacy theses and dissertations, but I'm going to talk about really the Special Collections digitization part. We use mainly flatbed scanners and overhead scanners to perform our reformatting, and we're in the process of creating a digitization lab that would eventually have a camera system that we'll build ourselves. Me and my team of students assistants, there's six of them, we together get the Special Collections materials scanned, uploaded, and preserved. I use Slack for communication with my students, and I use Google Drive for our project tracking and logging. We also utilize local servers for file management, and I have a server for temporary storage for students as they are digitizing, and then a preservation server that is for staff access only. We have 2 access points. Right now, we have the Gateway to Women's History, which is Content DM, and that is where we store our Special Collections, digital collections. And then we also have the repository at TWU, and this houses our scholarly materials, digitized theses and dissertations, ETDs, university archives documents, and special collections class materials. Next slide, please. So our life cycle is really based on requests, specifically from special collections. I have a digital project request sheet that we've worked together to create, and special collections fills that out. They identify what deliverables they need, what deadline they need these materials by. And after that is created, it's sent to me. I review and prepare the request. I have a digitization queue, which is what you can see on the screen, that very colorful chart. And so when a request comes in, I see where it fits into the queue. Do any deadlines need to be adjusted, anything like that. So I have that, and once the request has been reviewed, I've prepared the request for my students, so I get all their folders made on our server and let them know that we have a new request and it's ready, and this is the priority for that request. My students are trained using a Google site that I've created that brings all of our documentation together, and that's the Digital Projects Toolkit you can see on the screen. I have two groups of students that lead our digitization. We have a group of 3 students that do the scanning and 3 students that do the quality control, and each of those have a student lead helping with training and helping with troubleshooting of things. And I work very closely with all of my students throughout the process. Part of our request process is also a log. Not request process, our workflow is a log that my students fill out as they complete the project. It is a part of the request sheet. It's just a sub sheet of that, but they fill out the log as they go, so we know exactly where the project is as we are fulfilling it. After the students are finished with their digitization and they've created their access files and preservation files, they alert me and I ingest those into our local server for storage. And then I work on creating the metadata and uploading those to our different access systems, as I mentioned before, and ingesting those files into the preservation system. Next slide, please. And this is just a visualization of that process. You can see that special collections and university archives works very closely with donors and researchers, and they let them know what their needs are, and then they communicate those needs to my department, DSI, and we work with them to make sure that we know what the deadlines are, and we are doing lots of communication about the status of the projects. We complete the digitization, the quality control, we create those preservation and access files. And then I create the metadata and upload those materials into Glacier for preservation, and then into Content DM and DSpace for access. Those preservation access files and metadata files are also stored on our local server, and Special Collections has access to this so that they can retrieve the materials for the researchers and make any other extra derivative files they may need with watermarking and things like that. Next slide, please. So some of our challenges are, as you could tell, the metadata is a lot basically just with me. So it does tend to bottleneck and upload with me. So I'm trying to figure out, some solutions to ease that bottleneck a bit. We also are utilizing a single overhead scanner right now for special collections digitization specifically. And we share an overhead scanner with the theses and dissertations reformatting project. So we have to make sure that we schedule our students carefully so that no one's overlapping and taking someone else's scanning shift and things like that. We're currently building a new digital lab, and we're purchasing some new flatbed scanners and a camera, so that it's going to help with our equipment needs. Another thing is that we are continuing to refine our collaborative processes. My position is relatively new. I came into it at the beginning of the year, And before that, I did all my digitization within special collections. So now I manage it from the digital strategies department, and I work as in that liaison role. So we basically had to build our request process from scratch. So there's still lots of kinks to work out with that. When you're building something, brand new and figuring it all out, how do we need to update our request sheet? What information do we need? Are we missing any information? How can I make sure that special collections knows the progress of all of the projects I'm working on? How do I make sure that I keep them updated on if deadlines have to change or anything like that? So it's just a process that is, currently evolving. And we want to make sure that we're always meeting our deadlines, and how can we adjust to managing the higher volume that we are working with right now. And lastly, one of the challenges is just with student workers. I rely a lot on my student workers and making sure that they are appropriately trained. They have all the information they need is definitely challenging. Each project, as many of us know who work with digital projects, are very different and they have different needs. And so how do I standardize my processes for my students so that they're not confused with every single project that comes through, but I also make sure that I'm meeting the needs of the request? So I've relied a lot on documentation, but that can still be a challenge because documentation is very timely to, time intensive to complete. But it's been, even though we have a lot of these, even though we have challenges, it's been a wonderful opportunity to work with special collections and build these collaborative relationships between our departments. And through this collaborative relationship, we have created a higher output for our researchers, and we have the ability to now make more collections accessible and preserved at an accelerated rate. And that's it for me. I'll pass it over to Samantha.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you. I'm Samantha McNeely. I'm here at AUM, or Auburn University at Montgomery. So we are a part of the Auburn system. So you may have heard of Auburn, but we are a small campus in Montgomery, Alabama. We have a student population of about 5,000 students. So I am the smallest institution represented with the presenters today. So I do things a lot differently than everybody else does. So our archives is actually on the 8th floor of a 10-story building. But our space is actually only 1/3 of that floor. We share the rest of the floor with our tech services and our cataloging department and another university office that's across the hall from me. We have approximately 900 linear feet of collections. And so we've got a lot, but we don't have a lot of space to put it, basically is the main challenge that I have. We provide both physical and digital access to our materials as best we can with our limited space. Our physical collections include the Congressman William Dickinson collection. He served from 1964 to 1992. We also have the papers of Lella Warren, Wayne Greenhaw, Richard Marius, and Judith Patterson, all Southern writers. So we do have a focus on Southern writers, Alabama writers, and then also a subsection of women writers, Southern women writers from Alabama. Is one of our main focuses, as well as official university records. Our digital collections, I have here on the screen, include our undergraduate and graduate course catalogs, our thesis collection, the Judith Patterson collection, and the Woodham family genealogy that we have digitized so far. Again, we are a smaller archive, so it's taken us a while to get some things digitized. And I'll talk a little bit about the different, some parts of the different collection here in just a moment. But we have like I said, a small digital collection right now, but we do have plans to expand it in the future. So next slide, please. So some things that we really have to consider here at AUM is protecting and preserving. And so these are some of the things that we have to consider. Storage space, whether that's digital space or physical limitations. As I mentioned, We have limited physical space, so we're always looking for ways to provide access and to provide more space. So by digitizing some of our collections, some of the smaller collections, we've been able to create a bit more space. We did have offsite storage, but we recently lost it due to the loss of the building that the university had been renting. And we actually shared that building with our speech and hearing clinic, and it was across the street, so it wasn't very convenient for us. And when the lease was up and we decided we're going to get another building, they didn't include us in that new building. So we lost our offsite storage for that. And so we had to bring things back to a very limited physical space. And so that really was kind of the impetus for digitizing at least two of the collections that we did digitize. We also have to think about the platform, whether it's internal or external, in a content management system. We had Content DM. We used the free version because, again, we have very limited budget for that. And so when Content DM kind of reimagined their free service, it constricted us. And so we knew we wanted to expand, so we had to think of a different way to provide that access. And so I worked with our emerging technology librarian here in the library, and he created a site for us on Omeka to house these things. And so that really kind of got the ball rolling with the digitization. And we always have to be mindful of the budget for the project, whether that's time or money that we have available. And again, we have a limited budget for digitization. I have a flatbed scanner it's a really nice one, but it's kind of old. All the drives are now outdated, so I'll have to get a new one here pretty soon. And then I have what I call the workhorse. It's just a small desk scanner that I can fit about 50 sheets at a time, 50 to 75 sheets at a time, and get it through there very quickly. And we have a digital camera that sometimes we'll use if we need to. But that's it for our digitization technology that we have. And then we also have to be very mindful of time. One of our challenges that I'll get to is just staffing. There's me and a student. And so we have to divide our time judiciously with everything that we have, and kind of prioritize that as well. So next slide, please. And so our project life cycle and workflow, like I mentioned, is much different than everybody else's. We determine which collections are suitable for digitization. Not all of our collections are suitable for that. I mentioned the Congressman Dickinson collection. I have piecemeal digitized parts of that, but I can't. I would love to do the whole thing, but it's about 200 boxes, 175, 200 boxes of materials, because again, it spans from 1964 to 1992. And we did a weeding project on that several years ago to get rid of things that we didn't necessarily have to keep, again, because of space limitations. But the paper that's in there, especially the early papers, have the paper we're used to type on, where it would do in triplicate. So it's that very thin, very crinkly, I call it the onion skin paper. It does not stand up well to running through a scanner, right? And so then you have to put it on the flatbed. The flatbed is very time consuming. So what we do with that is we will just go ahead and make a copy of it. It's a little bit easier to put it on the copy machine and make a copy of it, and then add it back into the file folder, and then run all of that through the scanner. So we found a few workarounds for that. Our the catalogs, our undergraduate and our graduate catalogs, we decided to digitize those because we were getting a lot of requests for that information. Former students would call the registrar's office. The registrar's office would call us if they didn't have that copy available. We would have to go through the catalog looking for the course descriptions for students who were applying to different programs or needed certificate updates. And so they needed that information. So we're like, well, you know what? They take up a lot of space. Let's just go ahead and digitize them. So of course we do everything in triplicate. So we had 3 copies of every single catalog. So we had our use catalog that We would have, when people came in, they could look at it. We had a preservation copy, and then we had a copy that we set aside just for digitizing, because we had to rip them apart to be able to run them through the scanner. So we took all of those copies, ripped them apart, and then ran those through the scanner, and then uploaded that into our new digital archives, and then gave the link to the registrar's office, and it's available in a LibGuide on our front page, and in our digital access on our front page of our website, where now former students can go in and they can find their catalog, and they don't have to take a lot of time to come and ask us for that. Our registrar's office has access to it. Other admissions offices from other colleges who need that information now have access to it. So you have to determine which collections are suitable for digitization, and then prioritize which collections are getting used the most. Our Woodham family collection, they have absolutely no connection to AUM whatsoever, or even the state of Alabama, really. But we have their collection here with us, just kind of by happenstance. But I was getting phone calls and emails from people all across the United States wanting access to this particular family genealogies. I'm like, okay, we're going to go ahead and digitize this and get it up. And it is one of our most used digital collections, other than the course catalogs. And so we have to think about, what resources are available. Again, budget, staffing, time. What time do we have to do all these different things? Then we determine the work plan. What needs to get done? When do we need it? Where are we going to put it? How are we going to do it? And who's going to do it? And so, we have to look at which collections, the timeline, accessibility, the resources needed, and the workers that we have. So it's just me and a student worker. That's all I have up here in the archives. So we would just sit down and just have a conversation about the collection, what we wanted to do with it, what were her hours going to be during that week, what were my hours going to be. I'll talk a little bit more about that in challenges. And we would just have a conversation about how are we going to do this. And we would just kind of work through it like that. It's kind of nice, because then we can kind of see the problems and work through it as we're kind of going through there. And then, of course, you just have to do the work, right? You have to set aside that time to just actually physically do the work, and then make that final product available to the world. Next slide. And then the challenges, right? So I mentioned that this is a one librarian department with one student worker who worked 10 hours a week. So very limited time. And in addition to being the archives and special collections librarian, I am also the teaching and outreach librarian. So I am out of my office quite a bit. And so that's a huge challenge for us. Limited space, limited money, and limited time, again, because of my other responsibilities. So we had to adapt to that. And that's one of the great things about being so small, is that we were able to come up with some really neat ways to kind of get around some things. So I trained the student on how to use the scanner, and then the emerging technology librarian taught her and me how to upload to our new digital repository, all the bells and whistles that came with that. So that was one workaround. And then I empowered my student to make suggestions and to find solutions to problems, especially since I'm out of my office a lot. And she would be up here by herself, to go ahead and if something worked better, go ahead and do it. That way she didn't have to wait for me to come back, and then we'd have to have another conversation about it. I would empower her to make certain decisions. Big things, of course, we would talk about, and I would have the final say on those. But if she was doing something and something worked better, hey, go right ahead and do it. And that helped us to maximize our resource to do this very time-intensive work, especially with the metadata. So I had to teach her all about metadata, and we worked on trying to come up with a standard for that. But it really helped to have a good attitude and attention to detail, and commitment with a student worker. And to, again, I have one and 10 hours a week, but she was a student first, and she was a worker kind of second. So I taught her how to do these different things that are valuable things that she's going to be able to take with her into a future job. Time management, work planning, right? Workflows, all these different things. So to be able to teach as well as get work and a final product was a really great thing that we were able to adapt to, and kind of find ways around those challenges. But that is it for me, and I will pass it along now to Max.
Hello, everybody. Max Putam from Oklahoma State University. So Oklahoma State University is a land-grant research university in Stillwater, Oklahoma, with just under 25,000 students. So the archives play a strong role in preserving and providing access to university, local and state historical and cultural heritage resources. Next slide, please. In light of aligning work with the missions of the library and the university, I would like to go over a sample of digital projects that have been either self-funded or grant-funded. So on the upper left, for example, the Centennial HISTORIES series, a series of works that encapsulate the history of the library, the university, and education, and more. They're also to the left, center and bottom left. There are also works, examples from slide, the works progress administration, and with the woman sitting on the front steps is from Robert E. Cunningham collection, a collection of glass plate negatives. So both projects were sponsored by the Oklahoma Historical Record Advisory Board and funded by the NHPRC. And if you go to the right, upper right and lower right, we do have the Play Championship Basketball and Flying Farmers. These come from nitrate films that were held in the archives, though needed to be taken care of. So we were able to digitize those and send them away, in a sense, with funding by the National Film Preservation Foundation. In the center right, we have Angie Debo, who is an acclaimed American historian and scholar from Oklahoma, who wrote several books and hundreds of articles about Native American and Oklahoma history. This was about research, really, and word and website development. And then I'd like to end with the the Chilocco Indian Agricultural School. It's a collection that, for the most part, was digitized on site, and the original materials were not acquired by the archives. The digitized content was incorporated with the Chilocco History Project. It was built using Omeka. That includes a documentary, interviews, and more, and it's hosted by another department in the library, the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Next slide, please. So how do we handle projects? I guess it depends on the project, and this flow chart has been modified on different occasions. But so as you can see on the archives and the digital curation on the upper left, the archives are in a sense a department of two collaborative and somewhat distinct areas, the analog and the digital. The digital was created in 2018, and that is when I started at OSU. So both areas collaborate on inventory and prioritization of projects that help guide curatorial work, whether materials are or have been digitized, future project, grant work, records management, metadata / metadata remediated work, documentation of backend platform, promotion, and outreach. Above all, it's about collaboration, really. So if I go back to the Robert E. Cunningham with glass plates, just to walk you through this flow chart, fragility and degradation of the content was definitely taken into consideration, and so these glass plates were prioritized for the state grant. Copyrights were okay, and before starting the project, I was informing the other departments, like, for example, estimated storage with systems. We proceed with digitizing the negatives using FAGI standards, build metadata, following a data dictionary in coordination with the digital resources, digital services, I call it DRDS in short, with 3 students funded by the project, QC'd in collaboration again with the DRDS, and also with the DRDS access, providing access via Contendium, and then with the communication department establishing web presence. And so access was provided to the library, to the digital collections web page on the library site, as well as DPLA harvest that happens every quarterly, followed by promotion and preservation of it by ingesting master files into the digital preservation system, Rosetta. And then another example about the hazardous materials of the nitrate films, like such, for example, the flying farmers. The intent very much aligned with the objective that the university had to remove that type of material away from campus. Also providing an estimated storage needs with systems, working with external services to digitize, logistics, quite a bit of logistics up front. It was a relatively more involved project to, especially communication needed to take place throughout the project to keep everybody apprised of the timeline, in line also with the project plan that was established with the communication department in order to provide the project on time. So for access, we needed to create transcripts. And with that, worked with campus, their IT department, to add closed captioning to that. However, for this project, as opposed to the basketball, we were able to provide, we're able to use OHMS, right, or oral history metadata synchronizer, to create index and segment the film to make it more accessible to users as they can select distinct parts that they want to learn more about. So this is put together in Contendium, which is held also in the digital collections webpage in the library site, in coordination with the RDS and then the oral history department. Preservation ultimately took place as well by ingesting all DPX in Rosetta. Promotion. And I mentioned something about OHMS for the flying farmers as opposed to the basketball. The basketball, we didn't have the rights, so we did not use that. We use another way, also with transcript closed captioning, but it's only available in the library. Next slide, please. So in terms of aligning strategies with the missions of the library and the university, the intention really is to increase visibility of digital materials and preserve them. One example is, in order to increase the visibility, I started a pilot project in the fall of 2018 into the early part of the spring semester of 2019 to establish an inventory and begin development of face recognition models to add contextualization to archival digital objects. So to continue on collaboration takes place within the library and also outside the library. And this is important for curatorial work. It could take place such as in partnering with colleagues on collecting, organizing, and making senatorial emails and legacy materials accessible. And we're working on this now with a new set of records. Developing a more centralized approach to content retrieval, especially with the extensive OSU photo gallery that includes thousands of photographs containing photographs of alum, faculty, buildings, and more. And I think it's also a good way to build alumni relations. Also takes place to reconstructing the glass plate collection with local and state organizations as more content exists about this collection. And then grant writing, which is an important part of the process, and the work I do in making these projects possible, as well as scholarly work that follows with that. Next slide, please. There are challenges, and the challenges, first we could look here at establishing transformating workflows that meet evolving needs in every stage of the resource lifecycle and adapt use of technology to maximize deliverables. Staffing and budget is another. And depending on the work that I've done, staffing can include staff and many students. Like, for example, when I was digitizing the digitization up to 15 students, there are fewer students at this time to do metadata work, but I do have a graduate assistant who works on machine learning. Inventory and prioritization. For that, fragility, uniqueness, value are definitely taken into consideration to make archival materials accessible and preserve them, as preservation is part of an integral process established through a decision tree. Nonetheless, records are facing the challenge of creating, archives are facing the challenge of creating content out of sparse and inconsistent records, including the ever-increasing volume of born digital materials. And with that in mind, advocating for innovative ways to develop user-focused solutions that can meet evolving needs of students, faculty, and the community could be a challenge. However, having been able to resume machine learning work has been great, as it can offer the opportunity to build a more centralized approach to search the thousands of OSU archival photographs. It could also be a way to remove degrees of dependency on fading institutional memory. Thank you, everyone.
So now we have some time for some Q&A. Thank you to all of our presenters who have for their presentations and who have been diligently answering questions as they've appeared in chat. So if there are any other questions at this time, please ask them through chat, if you will, and our presenters will answer them.
I agree, Rosemary, just in talking with my co-presenters, and thanks everybody for coming. Just, I don't know, I sometimes am very in an isolated position, right? It's just hearing how other people do things, I just find to be very illuminating. And you think about, you know, their focus and the things that they've figured out and the challenges. At the very least, they have common challenges. Maybe you don't feel so alone. Kind of the nice things of collaborating this way.
So I've given it the, I've waited a bunch of time. Please complete this evaluation. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Thank you to everyone for coming today. And thank you especially to our presenters for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day and wonderful weekend.
Yes, thank you very much.